in the hands of an angry God. How many people? I have to move away from the microphone. The God that holds you over the pit of hell, much as one holds a spider or some loathsome insect over the fire, abhors you and is dreadfully provoked. His wrath towards you burns like fire. He looks upon you as worthy of nothing else but to be cast into the fire. He is of purer eyes than to bear to have you in his sight. You are 10,000 times more abominable in his eyes than the most hateful, venomous serpent is in yours. You have offended him more infinitely, more than ever a stubborn rebel did his prince. And yet it is nothing but his hand that holds you from falling into the fire every moment. It is to be ascribed to nothing else that you did not go to hell last night, that you were suffered to awake again this morning. After you closed your eyes to sleep. And there is no other reason to be given why you've not dropped into hell since you arose this morning, but that God's hand has held you up. There is no other reason to be given why you've not gone to hell since you have sat here in the house of God, provoking his pure eyes by your sinful, wicked manner of attending his solemn worship. Yea, there is nothing else that is to be given as reason why you do not this very moment drop into hell. Wow. Move back to the microphone. There's 2 points to that. And the one is obvious. Hell was a powerful presence for centuries and centuries. And it still is for many people. The other point not to be lost in this is that his point was about God's love. That it's sometimes hard to find if you know that whole sermon, but it's the idea that God's great love will still hold us from the fire, that even though we are sinners and not worthy of it. As a Lutheran, and I know there's a few ex-Lutherans out there, we begin the service with this. Most merciful God, we confess that we are by nature sinful and unclean. We have sinned against you in thought, word, and deed. We justly deserve your present and eternal punishment. That wasn't that long ago in my life. I used to always wonder about that, though. Obviously, this is not the only way that the church inspired people, was with threats, hell, guilt. But there were strong motivations. They were the presence of hell, original sin, guilt. In some ways you can look at it and think, boy, the old church had it easy. We can get people to do good. We can get people to serve. We hold those intensely powerful archetypal images of such things as hell. And keep that presence constantly there. If we give up those ideas, which many people in the modern world have done, not everybody, of course, but if we give that up, we have to ask, what motivates us to do right, to do good? What motivates us to serve the church? I want to take a look backwards and think about what the old world was like. First of all, there was the idea of community. To use an example from the Native Americans, and I could have chosen any number of groups, they had a sense of community. They lived in small groups. They traveled together. It was common for almost all of the people in North America that their name translated, or what they called themselves, was the people. There was that identity. We are the people. They had common goals by necessity. They farmed together, they hunted together, they danced, they sang, they worshiped. And think in terms of worship, there were not that many options. Very much on the same page that way. They had cause and effect relationships that necessitated that they cooperate and that they serve with a sense of serving the community. For example, if the effect, let me think I'm saying that backwards. If what you want to do is survive, then you must have a willingness to fight your enemies. And they recognized that. They had to out of necessity. And that became a sense of serving that was very clear. To jump ahead, which I'm going to do more in a moment, but you think about nowadays, the whole idea of serving in wars become very, very complex. We fight wars thousands of miles away, where back in the old days, you fought with your neighbors. Even many cultures back at that time even had the idea of human sacrifice. You don't get more intense than that concept. That you will take a human being, and for the good of the many, you will sacrifice that person. It wasn't done lightly. It was a sacred affair. Talk about serving the greater good. Was there a gap then between spirit and service for these people back in the old days? Take a look at some of the aspects we have in the new world, the modern world. First of all, we have way fewer homogeneous communities. We are a mobile, fragmented people here in the United States, and we're not alone. What's holding us together in terms of community? I don't think it's any accident that we call this building the center. We have a great need for that idea of being centered in something. With the mobility that we have as people now, and with the idea that we are sprawled all over, it's hard to look at the place that you live and think, there is the center of my community. Other modern stuff that has to do with serving and our connections. The idea of the haves and the have-nots. When you live in a smaller group, a community, a tribe, you know who is in need. You know who needs to be served. Do we still have poor people in the United States? Of course we do. But we live in separate communities for the most part. Obviously not entirely. But we want the poor to be over there, less visible. We know they exist. And then the haves live over here. Now, I know I'm oversimplifying that. Of course I am. But if you can imagine living in smaller groups, you're going to have more of an integrated blend. I think it makes it easier for us to say to entire groups, they're not my responsibility. And if they are my responsibility, I can deal with them at arm's length. Very different than the old world. People are less dependent upon each other in other ways, too. There's less need for cooperation. Think of the old idea of a barn raising as just one example. Someone's barn is destroyed, they need a barn, and it's for the good of the community. They rally the people and they build the barn, and there's a feeling that they have not only solidified the community, but that was an act of service. I wonder if nowadays, if money replaces the idea of service. It's much easier now to say, let's contract it out. I don't think that's just because of the experts. It's just easier to do. Please do not think that I'm saying that we do not need your money here. Keep giving money generously. We will soon have more needs. In the old days, people were moved by the Spirit. The Spirit existed. All kinds of places. People would speak in tongues. People would be possessed. People would be touched by God. And I'm not sure that that's as prevalent nowadays. We have fewer ghosts and spirits. Just to use that spirit, we're in a different context as now that we're in October. We have eliminated a lot of that or lessened it by modern science, by psychology. We talk about projections. Oh, it's not really a ghost and that person's not really possessed. It's a psychological phenomenon. We explain away much of the spirit in the modern world. There are a couple of passages in our hymnal from Black Elk, Native American Dakota, and he was a visionary. He would become possessed by the Spirit, and he would be entranced or go through some kind of partial fit. And then he would have a message for the people, and the people needed to hear that. That's the kind of spirituality that I'm not sure we see much of nowadays. I wonder if some of this has been replaced by a more rational, Richard says he still doesn't understand existentialism, but that idea that maybe our task is more focused on trying to find meaning in a meaningless world, which is one of the basic tenets of existentialism. That can be viewed very negatively, where you go into a state of despair. It can also be viewed very positively. But I'm not sure how much it has to do with the Spirit, at least as an entrance point. So do we have a gap between spirit and service, spirit and acting nowadays, more in the modern world than back in the old days? So let's take a look at a modern example. How do we define UUCSJS? Are we a club? It's a good question. I get that one actually from Barbara. We have many things that we share with a club. We have dinners, fundraisers, dances, book groups. We go to meetings. We have outings, even if some of our outings, most of our outings have to do with protests. We still do not have a bowling team. We have coffee hour, so we have all these social events. That sounds like a club, doesn't it? So are we a club? What makes us different from a club? We are different. And that's because our focus is on spiritual growth. We participate with this place to have our lives transformed. That's the difference in my mind. Other people may feel differently, of course. But that's what makes us separate from different than a club. So, to have that transformation occur, we have to face a few key challenges. One, we need to constantly be thinking of how to connect our spirituality with how we live our lives. We also are focused on spiritual growth. And that spiritual growth then is connected to service. Religion has always had to work that balance between the spirit and service. Even religions like Buddhism, which is very much turned inward. Again and again, if you get past that point, Buddhism is about service. How can you not be serving when you recognize that there's a oneness to everything? You do not just spend your time meditating. Some do. But that's a different calling. Most people in those kinds of inward-looking religions move outward. And what they move outward with is an understanding of their own heart, of their own self. That's what prepares them to greet the world with love. Eric Walker Wickstrom's book, Serving with Grace, is subtitled Lay Leadership as a Spiritual Practice. And it presents the idea that we look at lay leadership through a spiritual lens. I love his definition of lay leadership. Here it is: giving back. Here it is. In the book's introduction, he writes, quote, "Imagine if the practical and administrative work of the church, meetings, planning, teaching, etc., was understood not as a necessary evil, but as an integral part of the mission of the church to spiritually nurture us. What if lay leadership were not a means to an end, but an end in itself? Could you experience the meeting room as a zendu and the deliberations of a task force as a form of prayer? Imagine church not as a place led by a few overly taxed people, but one where leadership is a broadly shared ministry that members of the community undertake for the deep joy of it." Wickstrom acknowledges that we get involved in church leadership to meet people, deepen relationships, and to feel good about ourselves. Stopping at this point creates what Reverend Gary Kowalski calls the consumer approach to Unitarian Universalism. He said the following: "People who come to a Unitarian Universalism seeking spiritual goods are likely to be disappointed so long as they have the outlook of consumers in search of material goods. If their connection to our liberal faith is to grow into something more rewarding, they have to give up the consumer mindset and begin to think of themselves instead as shareholders, investor, co-owners in what happens in the church." I love that consumer idea. We come here and we take. That's so simple and satisfying in a way. The Building and Grounds Committee sees one manifestation of this shift as a move from the building mindset to an our building mindset. And think of our building in all capital letters. So how do we move towards service as a spiritual lifestyle? Well, we could take two parallel paths. One is the path of mindfulness, and the other is the idea of actually doing it. The idea of sometimes called fake it till you make it. Do the actions and the thinking will change. Mindfulness. It's an idea that it's a word Wickstrom uses, and it's an idea that's common in lots of religious thought. We usually associate it with Buddhism, I think, around here. So mindfulness. See service as working towards something greater than yourself. And keep that thought in mind. It's right along with our seventh principle, the interconnectedness of the web of existence. We are part of something greater than ourselves. And we freely acknowledge that in Unitarian Universalism. See service is a constant opportunity for growth. Gives you a chance to recognize your strengths, recognize your weaknesses. It gives you an opportunity also, in terms of growth, to, as the Quakers put it, see that of God in everyone. I'll get back to that a little later in the idea of a meeting. Think of those meetings that aren't going right. And you have an opportunity to practice thinking, there is that of God in everyone. Recognize that selfless duty, as virtuous as it is different than seeing service as primarily a spiritual practice. It's good to serve those times when you're thinking, I'm doing this as a duty. But can you imagine transcending that? Imagine shifting beyond that, saying, this is my spiritual practice. By the way, I've done all this. In case you're wondering, I'm through with this entire process. So I want you to know it works. Recognize that the experience of the process is more important than the outcome. That is also common all over the world in philosophy and religion. Imagine a scenario. You're going through a miserable meeting. It's frustrating. It's not going well. But at the end, the decision, the outcome is okay. You finally hash it out. It's all right. Imagine that same meeting with the attitude that it's spiritual practice, and you arrive at the same conclusion. Think of the difference. Instead of all the anxiety and ughness, you still get at the same place. You still have coffee hour. We are capable of choosing and adjusting our attitudes. I'm beginning to think that if it needs to get done, it will get done. And if it doesn't need to get done, it won't get done. Now, this may shock a few of you. That's what I think of with UUCSJS. If there's things around here that need to get done, they will get done. And if they don't need to get done, they won't get done. And that includes our very existence. If this place isn't meant to survive, it won't. Oh well. We had something neat going on, but hey, people just didn't quite feel like sustaining it. And I now am completely at peace with that. I feel good about that. But at the same time, I don't want it to happen. And that's one of the big reasons why I volunteered to be chair of Building and Grounds. Would you like to see the list of my qualifications? Hammer. Nail. Electricity? Plumbing? We have people who know about these things, and I am not one of them. But I am willing to put the effort into organizing those who do know, because I do not want this place to disappear. But if it does, oh well, no big deal. In the end, none of it's going to matter. Okay. Going through the motions. One of the ways that we can create change. Wickstrom's book, besides being a deeply spiritual book, is an excellent how-to. So here are some suggestions in the book. Highly recommend you get a hold of the book. We probably need a few copies laying around. 1, be able to say no to leadership tasks. Good. It's a great place to begin. Burnout is dangerous because it creates missing persons. And that's what happens if you don't say no. I would like to report that in the Building and Grounds survey that many of you have completed, and still some of you I would like to see you complete, 16% of those who completed it said, no, I'm not doing anything for Building and Grounds. I commend those people. I'm also going to read their names now. I am cloaked with immense power, as Abraham Lincoln once said. Mindful meetings. Here's a challenge, to think of our meetings, all our committee meetings and different things we do, not business as usual. Let's make some changes. Meetings are spiritual practice, even to the point of thinking that as the primary goal of the meeting. That's a real change. It shifts the focus from goal to process. Imagine how you would feel if you went to the meeting thinking of it as a form of worship. Imagine the impatience that you sometimes experience evaporating because you're in a prayerful, spiritual environment. Meeting practices. 1, setting the space. Think of the meeting as holy ground. He even suggests that you do a ritual like remove your shoes to remind yourself that you are on holy ground. See the agenda as prayer book. Rehearse. Think of the agenda and say, how are different people going to react to this? Emotionally, spiritually, intellectually. Rehearse it. The meeting begins with opening words. just like a service. Chalice lighting, ritual, reminders. Check-in, do joys and concerns. This is a different style of running a meeting. During the meeting, begin by silently meditating on the minutes from the last meeting. And think of such things as, what were the tensions? What were the contentious points? Are there things to be proud of from the meeting? And here's the one that I love. Was the meeting an example of what you would want to present to the rest of the world as, this is what we are? This is what Unitarian Universalists are about. Would you show the tape of the meeting? And if you're not willing to do that, then maybe there's a problem with the way we're doing meetings. Here's some things to do during the meeting. Practice holding your tongue. Listen more. He suggests that if it needs to be said, someone's going to say it, and it doesn't have to be you. So think of it, hold on. Take a breath. It's a practice that he says that you arrange before you have the meeting, that you decide how many breaths, 1, 2, 3, need to be taken to just settle things for a moment in the meeting. He suggests also that anyone can do it. Anyone can say, I need to take a breath. And everybody does it for the allotted amount, 1, 2, 3 breaths, and then you return to the meeting without any comment as to what just happened. You don't say, I need to take a breath because I'm sick of what you keep repeating. You have to do anything. Just need to take a breath. End the meeting with a checkout. It's an opportunity to make brief statements. Each person gets to make a brief statement as to how they feel, how they felt during the meeting, how they feel at the end of the meeting. Conclusion. What might we gain? Well, I'll do the old, what do we have to lose first? Well, we may lose some of our anxiety over questions like, are we sustainable? Are we growing? Are we prepared to grow? We may lose some of the anxiety over a question like, are we prepared to face the needs of an aging building? We have an aging building. Isn't that a strange thought? This building has needs right now that we're going to have to face through work, through service, through money. Are we willing to lose our habit of putting outcome over process? Will we still get things done that need to get done? Some of the gains. Greater involvement. Recognizing that we are all needed. That's a nice feeling. We're all needed. Less burnout. I know some people out there are thinking, yes, less burnout. Less frustration. And maybe more fun. I see the Building and Grounds Committee. I shouldn't use this example. I've heard that to get season tickets for the Philadelphia Flyers, you have to wait for somebody to die. I don't know if that's true or not. But that's what I want the Building and Grounds Committee to be. You want to get on the Building and Grounds Committee? Sign on the waiting list. Perhaps the greatest things we can gain will be in the area of nurturing spirit. Opportunity to practice getting involved in something greater than ourselves. That's a repeat, but it bears repeating. And there are no shortage of chances. Opportunity to practice replacing duty with spiritual practice. Opportunity to practice ego detachment. Think about that in meetings. You just lock in. You can let go of that. An opportunity to practice detachment from outcomes. Does it really matter what the end choice and decision is? Or even if it's made. We just spent 2 hours in the meeting and we didn't resolve it. Oh well, that's okay. What was the process like? How do people feel when they're leaving? And certainly an opportunity to transform our lives. An opportunity to recognize that all interactions and tasks are sacred. How can they be otherwise? And I think what we need to work on is decreasing the number of times that we forget that. All interactions and tasks are sacred. The work Seeking the Heart of Wisdom, The Path of Insight Meditation by Buddhist writers Joseph Goldstein and Jack Kornfield ends with a section entitled The Growth of Wisdom. At the end of the section, Kornfield writes the following about service. For many people, service and open-hearted giving become the very vehicle for their liberation and are taken as their path or way of practice. A sense of interconnectedness leads to the realization that all of our activity can be undertaken as service to the world around us. Following this path brings us face to face with selflessness and non-separation as surely as our inner meditation does. He continues with this. We can turn the actions of our life into the very heart of practice. We become the server and the served, and the interconnection of it all is the heart of service. Let it be so.